With Hugh Freeze in dire straits for Auburn, can Missouri claim another SEC coaching scalp this weekend?
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And on today's program, yes, we got to talk about if Missouri can finish the job down on the plains of Auburn, Alabama this weekend. I'll tell you this, in the SEC, I've got a ton of numbers for you. Let's just say you should take absolutely nothing for granted in this league in 2025. Plus, Dennis Gates and the basketball Tigers met the media yesterday. I've got some nuggets to share for you there as well. First, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. And I have to say, coming off a disappointing loss against Alabama, of course, this is an enormously important game coming up on Saturday. Missouri's first true road game. Of course, much has been made of that this offseason. And now that it's actually here, well, the prospects of a fired-up Jordan-Hare stadium is fairly daunting. And yet, well, the line already moving toward Missouri, and I would say with good reason. In fact, over at FanDuel Sportsbook, Missouri actually opened a 1.5-point underdog, believe it or not. Well, that line has now shifted, actually a relatively dramatic 3 points, I would say, to the opposite direction. Missouri now a 1.5-point favorite. Well, what's changed, you might be asking? Well, first of all, if you're the Auburn Tigers, I think in particular, that type of team, a team that has a lot of expectations, that frankly has a bit of a nutty fan base as well. Well, especially in the portal / 12-team football, college football playoff era, when you're 3-3 and 0-3 in the early season here in the SEC, when nobody cares about the Liberty Bowl anymore, for example, well, that's alarming enough, again, for a team that has high expectations like the Auburn Tigers. But now this is a team that just had its running back, one of its captains, by the way, one of its 4 captains voted on by the team just this past August. Well, one of their running backs was, depending on who you believe, either quit or was kicked off of the team for not meeting expectations. This according to, well, the official word from Auburn head coach Hugh Freeze. And here's the thing, even on as projections go on the numbers, just in terms of, hey, the Jims and the Joes, it's not as though Missouri and Auburn on paper is a gross mismatch. But I'll tell you this, one team is talking about having its running backs coach. One team is openly talking about looking for a new coach, I should say, at this point. If you think that seems dramatic, well, I'll just say this, regardless of the semantics of if Demari Alston, the Auburn running back, if he was kicked off the team, if he was asked to leave, if he left, regardless of the semantics, it's never good when your question of your job here, year 3 here for Hugh Freeze at Auburn. It's never great for your players are now publicly denouncing your decision and publicly backing Demari Alston. For example, junior safety Champ Anthony for Auburn, who was one of the other four players named captain in August, along with the now departed Demari Alston. Or here's what he had to say on his Instagram yesterday. He said, "Love you, family. You one of the least selfish and most loyal people I've met at Auburn. Keep your head up. Ain't never do no wrong in my eyes. You know the real family. I got you 5L no matter what. We voted you cap for a reason." And then in another graphic below here for emphasis, we, in all caps, voted Big Bro captain for a reason. So again, one of the fellow captains here of Auburn is now openly denouncing this Hugh Freeze move and supporting his erstwhile teammate here, Demari Alston. This is not a good sign for Auburn. And even there's tons of accounts out there, including Auburn Central and many others, but this is as good of an example as I could find. Auburn Central here saying Hugh Freeze practically signed his resignation papers by kicking Demari Alston, a team captain, off the team. He has now officially lost the locker room. Once that happens, nothing can save you. The Freeze era is coming to a swift and depressing end. Trash can emoji, fire emoji. So a true dumpster fire down in Auburn. And I'll be honest, I don't think that that's overly dramatic at this point at all. In a league where, for the millionth time, every single week is basically a dogfight at this point, you got to all be rowing in the same direction. And clearly, I don't think that is the case at Auburn right now. Frankly, I don't think you could pick a better time to play this particular Auburn team if you're the Missouri Tigers. And by the way, those numbers on this highly competitive and chaotic SEC here this season, well, Dan Wetzel of ESPN had some good context. He tweeted out, how competitive is the SEC this year? NFL margin of victory so far 10.8 points per game. SEC margin of victory 10.7. So basically a tie there. The SEC, in fact, 0.1 difference there, just a little bit lighter. So any given Saturday, as Wetzel caps it off there. Well said. It's really been quite a stark difference there. And I looked up the average margin of victory since 2018, and it really is a dramatic difference. You look at 18, 19, and 20, the average margin of victory, 17.5, 18.1, and 18.8. Well, then 2021, you saw a really dramatic drop, and you've never seen it up to as high as, again, those lowest numbers I just read you there, 17.5, never gotten there even close before. Now you're looking at 15.8, 15.8, 16.3, 14, and again, all the way down to 10.7 so far this season. You know what? And as there are teams like Auburn and Arkansas that go along and maybe you don't have a whole lot to play for this season, I do expect that margin of victory to stretch out a little bit, but still, the point here is the trend is very obvious. Ever since the NIL and transfer portal semi-free-for-all that we've all been involved in the past few years, the effects of it have been pretty obvious. Almost immediately, you saw a 2 to 3 point difference in margin of victory. It all shrunk a little bit. The ceiling and the floor have all gotten a little bit closer since 2021. And, well, if the last couple seasons, 2024 was the lowest of those past few seasons, 14, well, if this trend continues this season, we're going to set a new record, at least in the past few years, for the tightest margin of victory in the conference. So I expect this trend to continue. Maybe not as dramatically this season as it going forward, but I don't know. I think this is kind of the new normal in the SEC, as much as I hate that term. And coming up on the show, I want to talk about Missouri freshman receiver Donovan Olubade. I think he's probably going to be getting more action, at least this week and probably as the season progresses here. I think there's a reason why to believe he could really, along with Marquise Johnson, could put SEC defenses in a real bind and give them some tough choices coming up here the rest of the season. I really believe that. So let's talk about that. And yes, we'll get to some basketball notes as the program goes along as well. And believe it or not, the holidays are right around the corner, which is great. But at the same time, when you have guests coming over, celebrations, well, decorating and prepping that guest room can feel like a lot. Well, Wayfair makes it easy to personalize your home for the holidays with a huge selection for every style and every budget. And with free and easy delivery, even on the larger items, you can get everything you need without the hassle of huge delivery fees. And I love how easy it was to find pieces that fit my style and, yes, my wife's style as well, and also our budget. Everything was all in one place, and checkout was simply a breeze. So get organized, refreshed, and ready for the holidays for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That's WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. And, of course, the NFL is in full swing, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. You heard me. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. And before you make fun of me, the Kansas City Chiefs are back, baby. We're winning the AFC West. I don't care what you say. But if you think I'm wrong, well, I guess you could be stupid and put money on the Broncos. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. By the way, if you're already looking past Auburn and forward to Nashville for the Vanderbilt Commodores, well, mentally don't do it. Again, anything can happen in the SEC. But if you're looking to travel, party plans, that type of deal, afternoon kickoff for Missouri at Vanderbilt. That's a week from this Saturday, of course. Either 2:30 on ESPN or 3:15 on SEC Network. So, again, an afternoon kickoff in about a week and a half for that one. And you know what? This week and that next week, I have to say I'm expecting, if not a Donovan Olubade start over Josh Manning, I think you're going to see him get a lot more snaps. I think he's earned it so far, quite simply. In his short amount of action, he has stood out over and over again when he's been thrown the football, especially his ability to just win contested balls. And that's something, by the way, that Brian Smith, the scout master who I've had on this program many times, he hosts not only the Portal but Locked On Seminoles as well. He's a big observer of Florida football. He was telling me, this Olubade kid, I'm telling you, he can go up in the high point of football. Well, he sure can, and he did it against Alabama in a huge moment of fourth down play, one-on-one down the sidelines. Olubade just went up and got it, and quite simply, that's going to be something that is going to be there a lot for him, because here's the deal. If you're a defensive coordinator and you're trying to figure out how to stop Missouri, well, obviously Ahmad Hardy in that rushing attack is going to be, if not your number one priority, certainly a huge one. How could it not be your number one priority at this point? So in order to, prioritize rushing defense, what do a lot of defensive coordinators do? Put another man in the box. Here's the problem, though. At least this is the problem I think Missouri can put opponents in the rest of the season. Johnson is already obviously one of the best deep threats in college football, in my mind. Has Missouri used him enough in that capacity so far? Probably not. But the point is that skill is there. There is absolutely no doubt about it. If you're going to have a single high safety, well, quite simply, there is no safety on earth who is the Flash. They can't cover both sides of the field, so you're going to have to make a choice. If Johnson's on the outside, you're almost certainly going to want some safety help over the top there in 90% of scenarios outside of a high-leverage 3rd and 1, 4th down and 1, where you're just trying to stop a short yardage type of play. But again, if you're picking a side, well, that means that the person on the other side is going to be wide open. Not wide open, but I should say one-on-one on the outside. And in that case, if that's Donovan Olubade, that's a matchup you're going to take. He has shown the ability to go up and catch contested footballs. That's a problem. Again, if you're running two guys deep on the outside, you can't cover them with one safety. So what does that mean? If you're consistently having to protect that defensively, you got to play two safeties back. Guess who's now going to feast? Ahmad Hardy in that Missouri rushing attack. Just a real simple give and take there that I think Donovan Olubade, to me, more than Josh Manning so far, really puts puts that defense in a bind. I've been waiting for Manning to break out. I don't think it's quite happened yet. To me, Olubade has passed him up. That's just my opinion. I'd like to see him playing more going forward this season. And speaking of choices, the give and take, the ebb and flow of college football and your personnel, well, for Missouri, if you want to have Olubade in there, 2 outside receivers, and Kevin Coleman, which you want to on a lot of snaps, Kevin Coleman is one of the best slot receivers in the conference for sure. Well, that means that you got to take Jordan-Hare off the field, or maybe Brett Norfleet too. The point is, at least one of those tight ends is going to have to come off the field. And I was wondering, coming into the Alabama game, just how much Harris would play. What would be the give and take there? Well, Harris ended up playing only 20 snaps, and I say only because previously I think Harris was getting something like 35 snaps in a ball game, and it sure seemed like, especially on that first drive, maybe this is a coincidence, maybe not, but the run game sure seemed a lot more effective with Harris on the field. So, again, Missouri did fall behind in the second half of that game by 10 points at one point. Maybe that causes you to take Harris off the field. Context is everything. I understand all of that. I'm just saying, for those who maybe question why Harris is on the field so much, I think he proved his value in the run game once again. And you know what, with so much happening on the field, it's tough to keep up with all the action off the field, but there has been plenty happening here as Missouri flipped a couple of defensive backs in the high school ranks. Carter Stewart, a safety from Pearland, Texas, flipped, well, from the Utah Utes. Missouri flipped him recently. Also, ex-Cincinnati pledge Brody Jones as well, another player from Fayetteville, Arkansas, by the way. I say another, actually, in the basketball ranks. Well, Aiden Chronister, a guy that Dennis Gates has reeled in from Fayetteville, Arkansas. One thing that's interesting about Brody Jones, by the way, he's listed at 6'3", 175 pounds. I'll just say, back in the day, 6'3" cornerbacks were unheard of. And now, well, guys who are at least that tall is becoming much more of a common thing. I believe LSU has a cornerback who's maybe listed at 6'4", 6'5", something like that. Bama has I believe, a 6'3" corner on the roster. Hey, I guess as well as Corey Burton told me yesterday over at Locked On Vandy, well, if the receivers are going to be that tall, you got to get corners who are that tall eventually too. It's just something I got to get used to, I suppose. By the way, a couple of more offensive linemen assigned from the high school ranks as well. A 4-star over at 24/7 Sports from Venice, Florida, Johnnie Jones Jr., 6'6", 305 pounds. And another young man from Jackson, Missouri, another Jackson, Missouri lineman, by the way. And I say another, well, Connor Tollison, the current Missouri center, formerly a Jackson product from high school as well. This one, Brysen Wessell, a 6'5", 260-pound guy. Missouri just recently flipped him from Iowa State. He was committed there. And really, to me, the only difference, once again, if you're an everydayer, you'd probably know what I'm going to say here, but the only real difference between a 4-star, 5-star, and a 3-star lineman oftentimes is how much do you actually weigh in high school? How much weight am I going to actually have to put on you? Because if you naturally walk around at 6'6", 305 as a senior in high school, well, that probably is a lot more likely to translate than someone like Brysen Wessell, who, even though is a very large young man at 6'5", 260, to play in the SEC, quite simply, he's going to have to put on 40 pounds. That's just all there is to it. Is his body, his knees, his joints, is that going to be able to handle all that extra weight? Will he be able to play as athletically at that weight? That's the trouble and the challenge, I should say, with having to recruit and develop young offensive linemen. That is for darn sure, because there just aren't a lot of human beings who are meant to be that size. But speaking of gigantic human beings, well, Dennis Gates had some words about his basketball team, including I would say a positive update about Trent Burns, the Missouri senior. And you know what? He gave us some ideas, I thought, some hints about how he's going to use his centers this season. So a lot of interesting basketball notes to get to here in a minute. First, though, I got to talk about game time because, of course, college football is here, and I love it so much. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's just nothing like being there in person. But sometimes actually getting the tickets can be a bit of a hassle. So that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. And you know what? I really love zone deals. You just pick the section. Game Time picks the seats for you, and you save big money. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's a promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, download Game Time today. So to put it mildly, there have not been a lot of 7'3" centers in Missouri basketball history that could knock down a three-pointer with regularity. So it's very understandable that Trent Burns, well, is one of the most intriguing guys on this Missouri roster this offseason, especially because, well, we got to see him hang around on the bench all of last season without him actually playing. We're all very curious to see what Burns looks like. Unfortunately, well, he's had some foot problems that reared their ugly head once again. Well, here's an update from Dennis Gates. He said, well, first of all, you got to coach 7-footers differently. Their load management has to be different. So he's right on course. The timing of everything is great. And he's ahead of schedule in my eyes. Obviously, there was a procedure done. It's great to see him running, great to see him doing things, but we're going to make sure we get him to the games, and that's the most important thing. So obviously Missouri is going to be patient here with Trent Burns, but the fact that at least Dennis Gates is being optimistic here makes me a little bit more optimistic. I'll just say, though, generally speaking, foot injuries on especially really, really large guys, again, 7-footers plus like Trent Burns, it's something you got to be careful with at the very least. So I'm glad Dennis Gates and Missouri are obviously well aware of that. Another thing I thought was interesting, too, he said that Jacob Cruz, he has a goal for that young man to make 100 three-pointers this season. Not attempt, but make 100 threes this season. It seemed like a pretty big number to me, and, well, it is. Just for context, that would tie him with the 5th best number ever. Demoy Hodge hit 100 three-pointers at Mizzou in the 23 season. Ahead of him, by the way, number 1 all-time, Clarence Gilbert with 118, Kareem Rush 111, Cassius Robinson 105, and Gilbert once again with another season at 102. Marcus Denman hit 99 in the 2011-2012 season. So just right there, you know that Jacob Cruz is going to have to play a whole heck of a lot or just be the biggest, microwave guy in Missouri history. If he's going to play 20 minutes a game, I mean, he is going to be chucking it at a rate that probably would make Clarence Gilbert jealous unless he's going to play 30-plus minutes a game. So I thought that 100 threes there maybe was a little bit, just the number itself was maybe a little hyperbolic there from Coach Gates, but I think it does show his overall point is that I think clearly since Dennis Gates has gotten here, I think his goal has been, we're going to shoot a ton of threes and also just be as tall. We're just going to be a gigantic team that shoots threes. I think that's kind of his perfect, ideal basketball team. And, well, here in year 4 of Dennis Gates, I think we're getting closer to that ideal. I don't know that we're going to be as good of a perimeter shooting team as far as the guards go this season. But I think what you're looking at with the power forwards and the centers in particular on this roster, I think this is much closer to Dennis Gates' ideal. And one thing that was a problem with Missouri, if you're an everydayer, you heard me talk it about a lot during Mizzou basketball season last year. As much as I loved that team, I thought one of their downfalls was that they could never have quite the perfect 5 combination, in my opinion. In other words, their 5 best defensive guys never really matched up with their 5 best offensive guys. For example, Josh Gray was obviously very additive in terms of defense and rebounding in particular, but offensively, quite honestly, Anthony Robinson, Mark Mitchell benefited when that large man his presence was not in the paint. You would benefit. I think those guys are going to benefit this season from having Javon Porter, from having Trent Burns out there. Now, Sean Phillips is not going to be a three-point shooter. He'll be more like Gray. But the point is, I think, instead of going small, as it were, with Mark Mitchell as a center, that's not really something that is his forte. Now that you have Javon Porter, now that ideally you'll have Trent Burns, well, you've kind of got some different options there. By the way, Luke Northweather, another guy that Missouri expects to play center, another guy that Dennis Gates was talking up here a little bit, guy who's 6'10", 6'11", but can knock down a shot. So I think he fits what this Missouri basketball team wants to do. And I don't know if we're going to get up as many threes as Dennis Gates ideally wants to, but his ideal team, what it's going to look like, is pretty obvious. Again, just a gigantic team that can also shoot. That's what Dennis Gates wants, and hopefully eventually that's what Dennis Gates is going to get, maybe as soon as this season. So, with all that being said, thanks for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou and making this show your first listen today. And by the way, for your second listen, definitely check out Locked On SEC with Chris Gordy. He breaks down, yes, the best conference in college sports, ladies and gentlemen. Find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.